Alright, this is 3.7, part 2, graphing absolute value functions still. Couple terms, a little bit of a refresher. The first is absolute value function. That is when the graph is a V. So, let's see, absolute value function. Oops. Again, the graph is a V of some sort, or it might be upside down. That works too. Kind of the big one that we're getting out of this is the vertex form. And vertex form actually winds up being really, really like kind of malleable and used in multiple things. And so if there's any kind of like form that you should kind of like pay attention to, is this one. And especially because it's pretty handy. So y equals a, the absolute value of x minus h, absolute value, plus k, where our vertex is h comma k. Now, the last one I actually talked about in my last video, but if you didn't watch that video, then you might not know what I'm talking about. We have vertical stretch and shrink. Vertical stretch and shrink. And so what we have with that, and you can kind of think of this as a rubber band. Or I might even think of just myself as for stretching and shrinking. So if we have 0 is less than a, because we can't have an a of 0, that would make everything just disappear and we'd have a line, is less than 0 and is less than 1, then it's a shrink. It's a vertical shrink. If it's greater than 1, then we have a stretch. And you might be like, well, what about if it is 1? Then there is no change. So there's no stretch or shrink. And you might start thinking, well, what about in the negative direction? What a negative direction does is this just says flipped. And then these same rules kind of apply. If it's between a 0 and a 1, it's a shrink and it's flipped. Or if it's greater than 1 and it's a stretch, it's flipped, but it's stretched. All right. So we're going to do a couple examples, just kind of seeing this stretch and shrink and stuff like that. So if I have, and kind of other transformations, so state the vertex and graph, make a table of values. If necessary, plot at least 5 points. Okay, so I got y equals the absolute value of y minus, or not y, oops, x minus 1. And so when I do this, I'm going to graph it. And you don't have to graph the parent function if you don't want to. If you want to, then that's totally fine. But my vertex is at 1. Because when I do my vertex from here, it's this h value. It has this negative on it, but it's kind of the opposite of that. And so it's 1, comma, and there's no k, and that tells you 0. So my vertex is 1, comma, 0. Because there's no a, I can say confidently that it goes up 1 and over 1. And so it goes in this direction. I guess I could have used a different color, but that's fine. All right, let's look at number 2. So vertex, there you go. So number 2, we got y equals the absolute value of x plus 4. So my vertex, again, let me do this real quick before I switch colors. Okay. So my vertex, again, is this value, but this value actually winds up being negative 4. Then there's nothing out here, so it's 0. And so my vertex is at negative 4, 0. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, put a dot, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1, go in the other direction, and I have my graph. If you want, you could make a table of values for this. Let's look at number 3. y equals let's see, absolute value x minus 2, absolute value, my vertex winds up being 2, 0. Again, it's this value, but the opposite of this. And then k. So 1, 2, put a dot, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. Going to the left, same deal, up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. Just like so. Number 4. Now this one's a little different. So we get y equals -1, or maybe it's shown as negative x minus 2. I'll make a quick little graph off to the side. For my vertex, that negative out front doesn't change anything. I still have 2, 0. What it does do is it flips it. And so I'm still going to go to 2, but instead of going up 1 over 1, I'm going to go down 1 over 1. Like that. Okay. Number 5. Y equals negative absolute value x, absolute value, minus 1. My vertex is 0, because there's nothing with that x, comma, -1. Make my graph. What I do know, though, is that this is flipped. So I go to 0, -1, oops, red, 0, -1, down 1 over 1, down 1 over 1, down, down, going in this direction. Number 6, y equals negative absolute value x minus 1, absolute value. My vertex is 1, 0, and I know that it's going to be flipped because that negative out front. So I go to 1, 0, put my dot, down, 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 draw a line, draw a line. Alright, and that wraps up 3.7 part 2. Make sure you check in with your teacher and see what your assignment is. Have a good one.